Let's talk about every Cellar Science beer yeast, and at the end of this, I'm also going to go over all the other products and product lines that Cellar Science offers as a brand. Now, when it comes to the Cellar Science beer yeast, I'm going to speed run through these because some of them are redundant to other similar variations of yeasts through other companies, but they do have both Hornedal and Voss Kweik yeast. Voss Kweik yeast I talked about when I talked about the Lallemand brands, but it is a Kweik that is really, really good if fermented around that 80 to 85 degree temperature range. It's relatively neutral, but produces a nice kind of tangerine note in my mind in the final product. Goes great with light pale ales, IPAs, stuff like that, and it's just a good overall universal, fun, quick, active yeast. Hornedal is another Kweik yeast that can be fun to play around with IPAs, and its flavor profile tends to lean a little bit more into the tropical fruit world. So like, you know, pineapple blended with some stone fruit, anything in that fruity kind of realm. It also plays great with hazies and is another thing that's fun to play around with if you get into like a wheat beer that you want a little extra flavor. The reason to use Kweik yeast in general is they're really strong fermenters. They can ferment hot, so if you don't have temperature control, they're really good options, and they ferment relatively fast. The one thing with both these Kweik yeasts though is you want to make sure that you are adding a lot of nutrients and you have a way to oxygenate your wort going into your fermenter. It's very important these yeasts get a really healthy start, and then they do the job kind of perfectly. Cellar Science has 3 lager yeasts, all of which are relatively neutral and not somewhat ester performing. One is their Baja, which is kind of their Mexican lager yeast. You can expect this one to throw some slight sulfurs and be relatively warm with still being bright. It's also got the Feinsteffen lager yeast, which is their German. Their German lager yeast is the Feinsteffen lager strain and is really good at fermenting at a broad range of temperatures, and the esters that it produces are slightly malt leaning. I think of this one as good for like a Helles Bock kind of style, but it's actually a really good universal yeast. I've used it for anything from, you know, the Helles Bock styles to bigger Doppelbocks to even ale style strains like red ale, porter, stout, anything. It's a very, very strong fermenter. The Berlin is their last lager strain, and this one is also going to have a subtle malt leaning esterification, so it's going to push into some of the malt characters, again being good for something like a Helles, but it's a really good general lager yeast for overall pale light lagers. So anything that's going to be neutral and not going to be showing off any sort of hop profile, esterification, anything that's going to be a little bit distracting. This is a good clean lager yeast to use kind of across all boards. 2 other ones that they have in kind of that funky range, they do have their Monk, which is their Abbey strain. This one's going to be good for your doubles, things that have that big banana and then, you know, pitted fruit, dark cherry kind of notes to it. The Monk's going to be great for all that range of beers. You can also play around with it if you ferment it on the low end to be like a Belgian pale, Belgian blonde style yeast. And they also have the Saison, which the Saison is described as producing some lemon and citrus. And I emailed my contact with a More Flavor person, and he didn't give me a direct answer, but it sounds like it probably is the French Saison strain. From my experience using it, it has performed very, very similar to a French Saison strain, giving you light kind of lemony, peppery notes. The Cali strain is your classic like American style ale strain. It's a really good universal fermenter. They describe it being good for pale ales, IPAs, American style stouts, porters. My favorite thing to use it for actually is American style wheat beers. Other than that, I actually prefer other yeasts in general for most styles across all boards, such as their English strain. Their English strain is a really, really strong neutral fermenter that can be good for porters and stouts with a subtle malt lean because it produces some esters that kind of help lean into the character that you build, needing some chocolate, caramel, roast build. But being relatively neutral itself, I actually prefer that over the Cali for even an American style West Coast IPA. If I'm going hazy IPA, I'm probably going to go to their Nectar. Their Nectar is a bright, fruity, kind of tropical fruit producer, and that one tends to go really well when you're doing a big whirlpool edition. The Nectar is great for having some biotransformative properties, and overall it helps amplify a lot of the hop flavors, especially if you're going with some of these new world hops that have that big kind of fruit character. They do have a hazy IPA yeast they call hazy, which is a good all-around performer and also good for hazy IPAs. Probably not the one that I would lean toward because I prefer the Nectar, but it produces some bright fruity esters that do amplify the hop flavor, especially with big whirlpool additions. And it's good at a broad range of temperatures. Because of both the temperature range and the way that that produces flavors, my guess is this is the Sac Trois strain, but I could be wrong on that. From my experience, it's performed very, very similarly, giving you a broad range of flavors, anywhere from tropical fruits to like pineapple and not banana, but you could see why it might be there. That kind of flavor range. Overall, it's a fun use to do. Probably not the one that I would go with most beers. Last one they do have is a Kolsch yeast. Kolsch yeast is going to be a high flocculator. It's going to be an ale strain that can perform with relatively neutral flavor profiles. So it's going to be good for if you're doing like a lighter end of amber style beer, but really what it's meant for is those cream ales, Kolsches, and ale versions of light lagers. Sorry that was a bit of a speed run going through all the beer yeasts that they have. If you need any clarification on that, if you want me to dive in or do some side-by-sides, let me know in the comments below. But without making this video too long, the reason I wanted to talk about Cellar Science specifically is because of everything else they're doing as a brand, bringing in different products that are kind of revolutionizing what you can get as a home brewer and the price point you can get it at. So first let's talk about some enzymes that they have available to home brewers. One is the Brewzyme. Brewzyme is amyloglucosidase. That's the enzyme for drying out beer. It takes some starches, breaks them down into simple sugars, and makes it so that you can make a brut IPA or a lower final gravity beer that gives you more alcohol, but also makes the beer less heavy. Another enzyme that I didn't actually know existed before Cellar Science has it, but apparently a couple different companies make it, is this ALDC, and that is an enzyme that's designed to break down precursors to diacetyl. And so if you want this will make it so that diacetyl isn't produced during the fermentation process. If you have a yeast that is going to or has a tendency to produce diacetyl, this might be something to add during fermentation that, especially if you're going to dry hop and risk some hop creep, can make it so that diacetyl just isn't produced. You just don't run that risk. Glucobuster is similar to Viscobuster. It actually breaks down beta-glucans in the mash. And so if you're doing a long mash or a thick mash, or you have a heavy adjunct load, and you have any risk of a stuck sparge, Glucobuster can be a good way to make sure that you don't get a stuck sparge, number one. And depending on how your mash channeling goes, how your sparge water runs through your mash, it also can increase your efficiency and get you some more sugars in your final products. Clearzyme, it says it's there to eliminate chill haze. Clearzyme is actually, I believe, the same thing as Clarity Firm. It's designed to break down chill haze forming molecules, and also, as an aside, reduces the gluten content of your final product, I think. Pretty sure I got that one right. Finally, Silifine. Silifine is actually the same thing as Kiesel Sol. It is a silica-based fining agent. So if you have like Biofine, Silifine does the same thing, and they have it on the homebrew level. They have all sorts of other adjuncts that are available, and basically if you've thought about it as an adjunct, a water chem, pretty much anything that is useful as a home brewer, the entire Cellar Science line kind of covers all that. And one last thing before I kind of close this out and say, hey, good job, Cellar Science, for making a lot of products available to us that we needed this entire time. I want to point out their wine yeasts. The reason I want to point out their wine yeasts is because when people, especially home brewers that are beer focused, get into the wine world, a lot of times they look at a lot of packages with numbers or lettering on them that don't make a lot of sense in terms of what flavors you're getting off your yeast. What I like about the Cellar Science wine yeasts is they've packaged them in a way that very, very clearly color coordinates and describes the flavors that these yeasts make and what they're good for. No other wine yeast company has done that on their packaging. So as somebody who owns a homebrew supply store, I think that's great. And if you've got any questions on Cellar Science products, things that Cellar Science has, if you want to know the chemistry behind any of this and need me to break it down, ask me in the comments below. Or just ask me direct, just come here and ask me. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and I'll see you in the next video. Please subscribe. Please don't leave me.